What's going on, guys? Super E46 here, and I'm gonna be giving you guys a little bit of the final tips on this window regulator job. So the biggest tips I'll give you guys is this. This is a summer job, and the reason why I say summer job is because when you take off this door card, the one thing you're gonna notice is that shield barrier underneath. Some people say you can use a heat gun with it. I highly recommend that if you're doing it outside in the cold, because in my case, it was so cold, there was nothing left of the vapor barrier. So no big deal. But yeah, it's just something to consider if you are wanting to get your windows done and it's in the summertime. Don't put it off. Go ahead and do it, because it'll be way easier while it's hot outside to get that vapor barrier off without destroying it. The other big tip I've got is these clips, man. These are not talked about enough in any of the installs. So once you get to that window regulator that kind of sits in there like so, essentially what you're going to want to do is get these clips out, because that's what all the replacement regulators recommend. Well, the one thing I noticed is that there were some issues with one of the regulators I had. The other one was perfectly fine. So the thing to consider is, before you go out of your way to replace the entire regulator, check these clips out. And I'm not saying that these clips break, because these are actually relatively durable for them being plastic or whatever material it is. But definitely check these out and make sure that when the window is at the lowest point, particularly on the back side of the regulator, back bottom, once at the lowest point, you'll notice that, because the bolt goes in facing that way, facing in. But the weird part is that you don't thread it in through the other side, which would make sense because it would never come off track. But what happens is, since it's there and you're reliant on that bolt to be inside of there, if you tighten the bolt quite a bit, believe it or not, what does it do? It actually pulls it back. And so then when you go to the bottom, the spacing isn't quite perfect on this, whole generation of regulators within the door. And so what happens is that bolt pulls out a little bit, and then when you go to roll it up, what happens? Well, your window won't roll up. So something to think about there is put a spacer right there. Believe it or not, where that bolt sits, if you put a spacer there, it spaces that out just enough, and then put a spacer actually on the inside of where the regulator is here, right there, and then right there up top. It was tricky getting the top spacer in. I would have made a DIY about that, but it was very difficult. But I was able to actually get both spacers in, and what do you know? The window rolls up really well. The one thing I will let you guys know about this model year is that when you are rolling that window down, when it's at its lowest point, do not slam the door. Because when the window's at the lowest point, that's what I've realized is the massive flaw within these regulators. Because everybody says, oh, the regulators are bad that year, or this is bad. No, it's the spacing. I finally have realized, because it was the first time I ever actually did this job, it's the spacing. When they design these regulators within these doors, the spacing is just a little bit too far. And then the reason, I don't know why they did that, I guess it was possibly an error. And since the spacing is off, when you get the window down to the lowest point, you can look and see the front's actually fine. It's the back part of that regulator where there's just a quarter of an inch too much space. And so I actually had to add, that's why I had to add more than one spacer. But yeah, long story short, guys, if you add a spacer on this side of the bolt, I saw another guy talking about how he actually put, what was it he put in there? He put like a license plate bolt in the inside there. I mean, that could make sense. That could make sense. It would make more sense if you thread the bolt in through that side. That's what I would actually think you do, but apparently you don't. The factory ones that I just took out did not have the bolt on that side. It had it on the inside right there. Had it right there facing in. So it's a little tricky, but yeah, biggest tip I'll give you guys, put a spacer, and it should be good. The window works really, really well. Took me a few days, I'll be honest, to actually get both of them in how I wanted. But we got both the windows in. Check this out. Put a little bit of grease on there. All right, so You see what it just did there at the very bottom? The reason why it does that is because that is the regulator not being close enough. Even with all the spacers I put, it's still not close enough. Like I said, I think really the solution, the pure solution to the problem is actually, it's tricky, but actually somehow finding a bolt that you can actually thread in through the other side, and possibly literally taking the bolt that comes in here, flipping it backwards. I might try that on the next video. Flip the bolt backwards that comes in here and actually put it through that way, and maybe possibly find a longer bolt that'll thread through, or try to thread the standard bolt through. But yeah, that's all the tips I got on that window regulator job. Make sure you got some wire cutters. Well, actually I had one final tip. So this window is actually completely stuck. Completely stuck. And I looked through everything. I actually cut the cables and all that stuff, and no luck. So what actually ended up being the case was that because the window had never been replaced, it was actually stuck here at the top of the seal. It had been probably a solid 2 years, possibly more, where the window didn't roll up or down. It was completely stuck at the top. And so it was very tricky getting it down, because I'm sitting here pulling at the bottom, I'm cutting all the cables to the regulator, and nothing's working. And come to find out, it was actually stuck underneath this. And how did I get that out? You take a tire lever, like a bicycle tire lever, and you just ever so gently wedge it up underneath here, and slowly but surely wedge it, and the next thing you know, the window will start coming down. So that's all my tips on that one, guys. The window does look a little blurry. That's because I literally put grease on the entire thing, just because I want to make sure that it was causing that motor as less friction as possible. Another thing to consider is, and these are all the little tips that you won't hear about on forums or whatever, you have to get in there, do the job, and really understand what you're looking at. The regulators themselves operate very similarly to a bicycle derailleur, because the cables, I know the 50s kid was actually talking about how they look like brake cables. They are brake cables. They are actually the same thickness as bicycle brake cables. The difference is the housing is a little bit thicker. But the one thing to consider is that how they go around and they swirl around, all that stuff. When you go to the bottom, you don't actually want to keep pushing that button. When you go to the top, you don't actually want to keep pushing that button, because if you look at the regulators when you do that, every time you do that, it's stretching that cable out. It's essentially like as if you're on a bicycle and you're already in the highest gear and you keep trying to push that button again. What's it going to do? It's going to stretch the cable. What happens when the cable stretches? You're not going to have any power on your regulator. Another thing to consider is the motors within the regulator. I would have the door, probably should have did this video with the door card off so you could at least see exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're doing the job, once you take this off, you'll see the motor's literally right there behind there. The motors on these window regulators can actually overheat. I have a brand new regulator, brand new motor, and I was actually testing it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to actually see, okay, is this working? Is this, is this that? Like testing out everything. And the motor, and I feel kind of, and it does show, I will say the BMW motors probably wouldn't have did this, because this was a cheaper one, you know, $75. Shout out to carparts.com. I got it for $75 a piece, you know, really good price. Or excuse me, $75 for both of them, motors and regulators, shipping included. It was a great deal. The only thing is, the regulators are great. You can actually tell the regulators are good quality. It is the motors in these, it's actually smaller. You can literally look at the motor and tell it's significantly smaller. And so you want to be careful, because those will overheat. So just something to consider there. When you're rolling the window up and down, up and down, up and down, you can actually overheat the motor. And just because it stops working right then doesn't necessarily mean it's done. You just got to let it cool off, as crazy as that is. That's at least the cheaper motors. I never saw that with the genuine BMW motors, but that is with the cheaper ones. So that's pretty much all I got, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you guys have any tips or tricks about replacing the window regulators on an E46 and the motor, let us know in the comments. Another thing is, if you guys know a trick for these clips, if you know a trick to keep that back bottom part of the window securely in place when it's at the lowest point, because if I roll this window down and I slam the door, you will hear that window going back and forth, and the reason is because it basically has a tiny bolt that's pressed in here that's holding it in place. It's not actually threaded through the other side. And who knows, guys, if I stand corrected and the bolt is actually supposed to thread on the back side of the window, or yeah, the bolt, and then the screw goes through here, which I know the screw goes through there, but the bolt actually goes there too. So thread it through. It's definitely tricky. But yeah, if you guys have any tricks for that, for those clips to get the window to actually stay in place, let us know in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe, and as always, drive safe.